All right, great. So, yeah, I guess I need no introduction. What Ray actually means to say there is that I'm the crazy guy at WINLAB. So I always do the wild stuff. So, I've been hunting around for things to do, because we all know wireless is dead, It's just like data has been dead for the past 50, 60 years. And I have a background in biological communication and in neurophysiology. So, I'm kind of been drifting back in that direction. But at heart, for some reason, I'm a communication theorist. I can't help myself. So what I've been looking at is how to use molecules to communicate information. And there's, this is not idle research, because there are some applications. As things shrink, you need to get information around. And the question is, can you get information around efficiently and effectively using something other than the electronics? Because there are power issues and whatever else. So I'm going to talk about that today. I'm going to set up a framework for this, what I'll call molecular communication. And then I'll show you a few things that I think are interesting and might be really interesting in the future. So first thing, we'll call it biology-inspired molecular communication. So you prokaryotic systems, bacteria and us, the cells, they communicate, obviously. I mean, life is information, many folks say. So one of the most basic and ancient forms is, okay, and if we wait long enough, there's convection currents and everything, and I probably just communicated with Roy, right? So he has just received some genetic material from me, and you in the back soon, right? That cough will get to you. So, and I'm being kind of funny, but I'm also being serious, because coding things in molecules is a very dense way to store information. So you can actually begin to calculate bit rates. So you emit tokens. The tokens could be identical. So in your muscular neurotransmitters, acetylcholine, bursts of that get sent out. That's what causes your muscles to twitch when you're emitted at the synaptic cleft. There are very simple things, just ionic things. Ionic species can have effects. There's, epinephrine that's from your adrenal gland. There's all sorts of things that are flowing all around your body that are connecting things together, connecting systems together. So biological systems communicate, and they've been doing it for, a billion years. So anytime something's been doing something for a billion years and has tried to optimize it because of natural selection and energy is at a premium, you want to pay attention, is the point. So what I'm going to talk about today are inscribed tokens, things that you can actually write information on or not. They could be identical. It could be a particular protein species, like one of these, epinephrine. And I'm going to talk about that. But in the back of my mind, and in the back of your minds, I want you to think that systems are getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and the piece parts need to talk to each other. So how will they intercommunicate? So the usual way, right, would be through our radio frequency or optical, electrical. But the bottom line is that you have antenna mismatch. The wavelengths of these things either have antenna mismatch or the medium sucks up the energy. So there are problems with using what we know already, wireless, traditional wireless, I'll call it, in these nanosystems. Token exchange might be more efficient. Now the other thing is that maybe macrosystems can benefit from molecular communication. Now, I know right now I say molecular communication. I've said that about 10, 15 times, I'm sure, and I haven't described what it is. We're going to get there, and I'm going to give you a model. So I say that there's some intriguing science and engineering there, and it's fun, and it's different, and it's a different kind of wireless communication. So
Chris, by token you mean molecules here. When you say token exchange is more efficient, you're saying exchanging molecules is more efficient?
Right, so when I say molecule, anytime I say molecule, I'm going to abstract that in the typical sort of way, and I'm going to call that a token. And that token might carry information itself, or it might not. But I'll get to that. Thanks, Norm. All right, so there's a lot of recent work in the area. I'm on the steering committee for a journal that's coming out. I've been an editor in the past 3-4 years. There's been a lot of interest in this molecular communication. And there's a lot of different ways of looking at the problem. And if you know me at all, you know that's driving me crazy. I like things that are simple. And people are talking about relay networks in bacteria. It's like, look, you don't even understand the fundamentals. Don't tell me about relay networks. And if Ubli is here, you know, if that gets back to Ubli, I've already told Ubli that stop talking about relays until we understand the physics. So what I want to know is, you'll remember this, right? That's the old elephant and blind people. I want to figure out if there's a unifying elephant. So what I'm going to talk about is a framework, fundamental limits, and some kind of crazy applications that might not be obvious until you actually think about it. All right, so what are the fundamentals here? Energy use is fundamental. So what I mean by energy usage, I mean token construction, molecule construction and transport. That's the fundamental thing that a cell has to do. That's the fundamental thing that you have to do if you communicate. Inscribed matter is fundamental, meaning if you're going to construct a molecule, that has information in it. And here's an interesting factoid from the last, about 10 years ago, I had another crazy paper that talked about using inscribed matter to send information over very long distances. But the thing that I want you to think about there is that if you look at RNA, you can pack Avogadrian numbers, 10 to the 24th bits per kilogram, into mRNA. That's a huge amount of information. And you have an empirical existence proof because, you know, that's how cells send genetic material around. They use mRNA, so it's incredibly dense. Timing is also fundamental. When I release something, it takes some time to get to where it's going. So the time that I release is, could you think of it as a signal, and the time that it's received is at the other end of the channel. So there's a mutual information between timing and release. And I'm going to dig into that a little bit. Roy, what do we got? Thank you. Mean first passage time is going to be key. That's a nice abstraction. So, you know, there's a bunch of stuff here. I'm old and lazy. It's all in conference papers as opposed to journal papers. So sometime, you know, hopefully before I lose it completely, I'll put this stuff into actual journal papers. But, you know, they're at ISIT, so it's close enough. I'm going to give you the timing channel abstraction. I'm going to whiz through the information theoretic modeling, and I do that only for the information theorists here, because they haven't seen it. I'm going to talk about energy. I'm going to talk about bounds. I'm going to talk about some ballpark calculations, and here we go. So here's the fundamental model, and this is worth spending 30 seconds on. We have something that's emitting tokens. These little balls here are tokens. They might be the same, meaning, you know, all the black tokens are indistinguishable, but they might be distinguishable from the grays and the lighter grays and whatever else. Or they could all be black tokens. They're being emitted. They're being emitted at some time. They may carry some payload, and they drift in some sort of way from hither to yon, where they're going to be captured. I'm not considering any of the physics of the capture. I'm going to assume perfect capture. So the model is kind of covariant, as in Tom Cover. I'm drawing a box around the receiver. I'm drawing a box around the emitter. And I'm looking to see how much information can be transferred between the emitter and the receiver. Plainly and simply. And again, I'm not worried about the actual capture dynamics, because by information processing, that can only decrease the channel capacity. You could also imagine putting fans on these things, because diffusion is kind of slow sometimes. So that's also covered in this sort of framework. And you know, let's see, how much of this can I just blaze through? Because I really want to get to, I'm probably at 10 minutes now, and I really only have 5 minutes. So for the information theorists out there, here are the release times. So I'll talk to Narayan and Roy in particular. Here are the release times. Each token drifts across the channel. It takes some time d, stochastic. Those times are IID. At the receiver, if they're all identical tokens, you don't know which is which. You don't know whether it was launched from, the token that you received here was launched from there, or there. So they're sorted in some way by order of arrival. So you lose the information about which one of these places it was sent from. So that's the fundamental model. First passage time, I'm defining it there for you. And this is really for only the information theorist. You do the usual workup, and this is easy. If you know which token corresponds to which receive time, then you just do the mutual information. You got a bunch of parallel channels, and Sergio Verdu solved this. 1984 was the Fits Through Q's paper. Sound about right, Ray? Maybe a little bit, it was in the 80s. I know it was in the 80s. I don't remember when it was. Maybe it was late 80s. He invented that. The problem is, that's easy, but the problem is that because these things are identical, you don't know which corresponds to which emission. And that's the hard part. So I'm mentioning this because this has taken quite a bit of effort. It could be that I'm just stupid, but it's taken quite a bit of effort to work this out, and nobody else has worked it out yet. At least not like this. So, blah, 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 blah. You do some cute mathematical stuff. That's, I could dance around here if I had a whole half hour to talk about it. But the bottom line is that because you can't tell which thing got sent from where, just assume that the input distribution is symmetric, and that simplifies the problem immensely. So, blah, 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 blah. This ordered entropy, after you make all those nice assumptions that have nice physical ramifications, you end up with this nice expression where this is easily calculated and you just subtract the number of permutations from it. So again, don't worry about this because I don't have time. Blah, 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 blah. And here's really all I want you to know, is that we have a bunch of results. So there are closed forms for some of the expressions here, which is really kind of cool. We have some lower bounds, which are nice. We have some upper bounds as well. They're not great upper bounds, but they're upper bounds, and they're better than information processing, data processing. Now, to convince the information theorist that what I'm doing is valid, I gotta do some channel stuff, but basically, hand waving here. So punchline is that as long as when you emit a token, it takes a finite amount of time on average to get to the receiver, all the information theory works. All right, so we define a bunch of things. There's a capacity per token. You can take some limits, life is good there. You can also calculate capacity per unit time. Again, this is a summary of a few years' work. But it comes out to nice, simple stuff. And did I define rho already? Yeah, it was hidden here. This is the number of tokens you launch per unit time. So I'm holding that constant, and the reason I'm holding that constant, if it takes a certain amount of energy to construct a token, then that's an energy constraint that you're talking about. And we all know from in information theory, if you have infinite energy, you got infinite capacity. So you have to find a way to hook the energy in there and fix the energy that you're using. Okay, so identical tokens, let's look at construction energy. That's simple. For identical tokens, we'll just assume that there's some number of joules per token. For inscribed tokens, it's a little trickier, but interesting. And the funny thing is that this actually has some bearing on network coding, but I'm not going to talk at all about that today. There's some energetics for how you construct your tokens. There may be a substrate. If you pack B bits into it, I'm going to assume that there's B times some number joules per token. So the more information you pack in the token, the more energy it took to construct it. And then, because you can't tell what the order of the tokens was, unless there's extra information carried along in the tokens, you got to quantify that. So that's going on here. And there are bounds on that that come from the previous math that I gave you. So again, this is kind of a semaphore for folks like Roy and Orion, but the big picture that I want you to remember here is that we're sending out something. They need to be decoded at the receiver. If they got a payload, just like with packets and packet networks, I got to have some sort of sequence number on there. And what's the minimum amount of information that I need? Well, that's what this work addresses and nails down. All right. So let's define a few things and do a couple of stuff. Roy, where are we? Thank you. All right. So, oh my goodness, you don't care about that. You don't care about that either, because it's just math and I haven't explained it yet. So let's go directly to these plots. So what are these plots? What I plotted here is there's this parameter chi, and what this parameter chi is, it's how fast the rate at which things drift across the channel over the rate at which you launch things into the channel. So if chi is really large, it means the stuff gets there really fast as compared to how fast you're launching it into the channel. So if you think about tokens floating around in the channel, when chi is large, there aren't many tokens in the channel at any one time because they get sucked up almost immediately. And what you see here, if we're looking at information in efficiency, in bits, in info per unit energy, turns out, just looking at all of these things, where's mine? So here, this one is if you're just sending a payload with the token. This one, I think, yeah, that's the timing, if you use only timing information. And this upper curve is if you use timing information plus payload information. So the thing to think about here, the thing to notice here, is that in a diffuse sort of system where you send things out very slowly, or if you want to have very high efficiency per joule, bits per joule, what you want to do is you want to send your information out really slowly in this diffuse sort of way, and you want to use as few bits per payload as you'd like, as you can. So that's b equal 1, or just use timing alone. So that's kind of an organizing principle. Here's something else. Now assume that you're trying to maximize, you want to do efficient rate, so the amount of information you get from hither to yon. In this case, looking here, what you want to do is you want to use always payload and timing. Using timing alone sucks in this particular case. The rate that you can achieve using timing alone is not as good as the rate that you can achieve if you just tack some information onto that token. Okay, so again, I don't expect you to get the details of what's going on here, but let's play a little bit. So here's your system, here's your source, you're emitting molecules, tokens into the channel, they bop around and they arrive at the sink. I'm going to assume that the protein construction, the token construction, is this. ATP is adenosine triphosphate. That's a typical, that's the molecule that carries energy in biological systems. And this is the amount of energy you need to construct a token of B bits. Let's use some real diffusion coefficients. Okay, so that's typical in air, that's typical in water. And as you'd expect, air is much larger, the diffusion constant is much higher in air than water, because there's fewer things to bump into. All right, mean first passage time is approximately that in a linear sort of system, one-dimensional. So if you want to get information across a table about a meter, so you're emitting things and the air is completely still, there's no convection, no nothing, it'll take about 14 hours for a molecule on average to get from here to there. So that's not very good. If you look at synaptic clefts, which are small, 20 nanometers, things get across in 20 microseconds. So let's do some quick calculations using all of these numbers. And I've kind of waved my hands, you got to believe me, or I'm forcing you to believe me.
So Chris, where did you get that number for the energy? How do you know?
Oh, this is just, so if you look at construction of molecules, if you go in a biochem text, if you construct a protein, each additional amino acid you add to a protein costs about 4 ATP. So that's where the physics of this comes from. So I'm using that as an example. It might be a lot lower, or practically it might be higher, but that's a physically empirical example. So did I answer your question? So it comes from a biological system. So you figure if the biology can do it, we can do it too, as engineers. So let's do the numbers. So what I'm going to do here is we're launching things in, and basically we got one token in the channel per time. And across the table, you're talking about bits per day, but it's bits per day per attojoule. Okay, atto is 10 to the minus 18. Across the synapse, it's megabits per second per attojoule. Okay, again, interesting numbers. Now, let's pack more information into the bits, into the tokens. So across the table, it's still kind of small, kilobits per day, but it's still femtojoules per femtojoule. So that's 10 to the minus 15th joules. So this is really efficient sort of stuff. And across the synapse, you're talking about gigabits per second per femtojoule. So these, this is beginning to get kind of interesting when you think about it in terms of energy efficiency. So here's the punchline of everything, what I want you to come up with. If you don't remember anything about this talk, I want you to remember this figure. You know what this is? Taking a look, can you guess what this is? Right, exactly. So it's a server farm somewhere. And all of those things are fans. And it's blowing stuff around in that server farm. So let's suppose that, let's not consider token construction or assume that token construction costs less than blowing the stuff around in these devices. 1 milligram of RNA per second implies a data rate, just blowing that around, of about 10 to the 18th bits per second. So the potential for molecular communication could be ridiculously large. Now, there's a caveat. You should be appropriately awed at this point, but you're not. But what I want you to think about, there might be latency associated with that. And this talk was just about, I gave you a timing, I gave you a framework for molecular communication. I showed you some lower bounds. If you want bit efficiency, do things slow and let things drift across slowly and use small payloads. Rate efficiency, spit out a lot of stuff pretty quickly and use lots of information per token. And you can get kind of scary efficiencies and rates with this stuff. And that's really the punchline, but there may be some transport latency. But again, if we're talking about milliseconds, maybe that's not too terrible in some actual macroscopic systems. So that's it, and I think I've stopped. How far over was I? About 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever. So I'm done, thanks.